Hello, welcome to Self-Generated. My name is Steve. Thank you for joining us as we continue our conversation and exploration about the idea of complexity and how that might affect you, about how moving from the view of something simply to the complexity of it, the greater layers of reality that it contains, can empower you to understand things to a level that you didn't even know were possible, to experience things differently because fundamentally we experience our world more based off of what we believe it is than just what it is. And that being able to look at things with extra layers of complexity and being able to explore them in a logical way without having a great deal of emotionality attached is an empowering ability. And it's not to completely remove emotion from it. It's not to do X, Y, and Z that is an absolute statement in and of itself. It's to just add layers and explore and be comfortable with them. You don't need to love them. You don't need them to be true, but you need to find a way to not hate them. And that's what we're trying to look at. And that we've been looking at complexity, and I've been talking about the idea of complexity in some big ticket items when it comes to society with Me Too movement and economics at large. But I'm going to try to close out this discussion in looking at our ideas of looking at things simply versus the complexity and the core of how that actually affects you on maybe a daily basis that you didn't realize. Maybe the spine of society has some aspects to it that need a look, that the core fundamentals of how we work as a society have reasonable questions attached to them that the majority of us don't bring up because, in no small part, our inability to look at the complexity and nature of things for what they are. So fundamentally, what I'm talking about is an ability to literally discern truth. What do I mean by that is that truth, we can get into many different arguments about what is true. I don't want to give it an absolute certainty to truth. There's no way to know for sure with 100% certainty about anything. But we can have the best educated guess, the most likely based off of what we understand. And that we also need to be open to things that we might not understand, to other likelihoods. And so that's when we're looking at complexity and we're looking at all of these things, that there isn't an absolute truth, but there are steps closer to what's really happening. There are things that are closer to whatever truth might be if there was a 100% true thing. It's hard to even describe because we don't have the language for something that's not absolute. Truth is as absolute as it gets. But we don't live in a binary world where things are not or are, or yes or no. We live in a much more complex world. But the nature of our minds, the nature of communication, and the nature of the societies we build make us work in a more simple way because it's effective. It works, especially at scale. But we're at a stage in our civilization where I believe, at least individually for me, I was able to take advantage of my understandings of these things, that my beliefs were integral to my experiences, and that if I was able to look at the complexity of the world without having to pause and stop and be upset or make things vilified or exist within a story as I was exploring, once I was able to move past that in a real meaningful way, I was able to imbibe and unlearn and take in so much more about what's happening in the world, and my experience changed. It wasn't that my emotions went away. It's that I wasn't literally triggered by a lot of the things that used to be a complete full stop. You can't do anymore, Steve. Right? If I was being challenged in a way that would challenge my ability or my manhood or any of these other things, it would be crippling to me in the past. And it no longer is, because, or at least to me, my understanding of it is that I changed how I felt about me, what that meant, allowing other people to have their opinions, and that realizing that I can't control a lot of these things that I felt I needed to control. And once I got comfortable with knowing that that's the truth, that's the complex truth, I don't have control over those things, but I can control these other things. I no longer originated the fears, the doubts. I didn't need to reminisce on those things that weren't true anymore to me. But I didn't get there through any other way other than embracing the complexity of how I worked, embracing the complexity of nature and myself and others in our history. And my experience changed. And that's what ruined me to be from being a salesperson. And I'm going to round out the idea of talking about complexity, and especially when it comes to looking at, say, morality and economics or capitalism. We don't really think about it too much because, in no small part, if I were to say that capitalism is somehow immoral, then That's a non-starter. Why? Because I would challenge the reality of most people. It would challenge the systems that we actually work. And we think in a very simplistic way so that if I bring any level of challenge, then that's bad. And that's what prevents us from actually even engaging with the reality of economics. So, for example, as I said, I was a salesperson for many, many years. And it doesn't matter. I've worked in shitty places and I've worked in Fortune 500 places. And the idea is that we need to make as much money as humanly possible off of every single customer. And yes, you'll make exceptions periodically. But I'm telling you, definitively, the biggest ticket sales in legit and to illegitimate businesses that I've seen have been from people who were way overpaying because they fell in love with the salesperson. And that is actually that's not looked at as immoral in any way, shape, or form. It's looked at as a cornerstone to business that you're paying for the personality. Now, if you, the consumer, were aware of that, would you feel comfortable with it? That's what I'm talking about. Looking at the reality, the complexity of the situation, that things are made complex and then commodified. What do I mean by that? If you want to buy a house, you need a real estate agent. That it's written into the laws of how things are sold. You have commodified, made a business out of what used to be a person's ability to handle complexity. And that you get that again and again and again, over and over and over. We don't read all the terms of service. We don't get to that level of complexity. So things are hidden in there. We are used in that way. Just recently, if you may be aware, there was that whole case with Disney where they tried to get out of paying a wrongful death lawsuit because of terms and conditions for Disney Plus. I believe they ended up stopping that path, but the idea behind it is that hidden in complexity are nefarious things. If you can label them nefarious easily. It's like, this is not moral, this is not cool. How about that? It's not cool. Well, the world is built on the not cool. Economics runs on the not cool. The idea that growth, unlimited growth, is a core to all business, stock market, all of these things. That's absurd. Unlimited growth is unrealistic. The only place that exists in nature is at the high ends of physics and cancer. And, where cancer's not that great. It's absurd. It's not necessarily realistic. But we don't necessarily work on the realistic. The realistic is in the complexity. What we do is in the simplistic. How we look at it, how we handle it is in the simplistic. And that the inability to look at it in the complex, closer to reality, is why it is in fact still in place. Why things don't change. Politics, same thing. Again and again and again, throughout history, you have two parties in America that seem to be what represent Americans' interests. But that's not necessarily the case. One little quick look at the idea of voting, and let's just say the last time there was an election, we had a very, very big turnout. 115, I'll find the numbers and I'll put them on the screen. It was 100 and something million people voted, and about 50-50 split, roughly, between the Democratic and the Republican candidate. And so that when you really calculate it and you look at it, that a country with 380 million people, and the 100 million change that voted, and that probably less than 50% or a little over 50% voted for either one, you're talking about 22, 23, 24% of the population really deciding who is president. That's in your state, same thing. Maybe a third of the people vote or a quarter of the people vote, and half of those are the ones that pick. Does that sound, when you step back and you look at it, does that sound democratic? Well, maybe no. Well, because we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Democracy is the oversimplification that we talk about. The patriotic idea that if I say anything other than we're democratic, it would be a challenge to your view or your model of the world. And unless you're willing to embrace complexity and look at the complexities of actively going on things, then the only other way to take that statement is a threat. So that person is either stupid or dumb, or they're a liar, or they're a tool, or what other narrative device that person has to come up with, or that naturally comes up and is assigned to something like that, because they don't think about it. Because that's the simplicity. This is wrong, bad guy. This is good guy. Cherish them. We see it almost like a caricature in online interactions. And that one thing to note is it's not just the people who are making all the noise. It's all of those who make no noise allow for the volume of this. to fill the void, to perpetuate the simplicity of things. We can't create a culture of diversity in thought. We're worried about creating a culture of diversity in personages. And we're trying to do that by destroying thought. That's why it won't work. There's a lot of different things that when you look at it through complexity, just a couple extra layers, you can even reinforce your view. You can go, oh, that makes more sense. But full stop, if you were unable to move forward with looking at things in ways that do not match how you believe them to be true, you are the person that needs to listen to this, because that's what we're talking about. The first step of acknowledging and even realizing that's a thing that's happening, and that's embracing complexity. And to realize it's not a good or a bad thing. You don't need to beat yourself up about it. If you embrace complexity, you can realize that these overly simplistic things that we do by nature are surmountable, but you have to be aware of them. You have to act within them. You have to learn to allow yourself to be comfortable with them. And they're everywhere. So that's the point of talking about all the different aspects of complexity, is that you can explore it in the avenues in which you are comfortable. Eventually, the idea is to trickle down to your notion of self, your beliefs, your experiences, the things that you have done, the things you are doing, because that will be fundamentally how you change yourself. But that skill set can come from exploring the rest of the world in an open and embracing way. And that's not to say that you have to love everything. Again, it's just getting to a point where you don't have to hate it. You don't have to despise it. It doesn't have to be the enemy. That's empowering. And one way to do it is through the exploration and understanding of complexity, of allowing things to move past simplicity, to not be comfortable with stopping at the simple answers. Be willing to challenge, especially the things you already believe. Once you're literally physically capable of doing that without stopping, being impinged, not sleeping later that night, you are, for the lack of a better term, leveled up. All right. If that's not necessarily true, that's just a metaphor, but it's a way to think about it. That's simple, that you can feel is true. You are no longer burdened by the doubts of, I need something to be this way. And it's not a switch that you flip. It's a model that you build. And in order to do that, you have to let go of some old things, hold on to some new things, and challenge everything. And that's what we're trying to do here on the Self-Generated Podcast. Hopefully in the next week or two, I'm going to be doing much more of a video, fireside chat style. Not a technical marvel myself. I'm not super capable when it comes to that. So this is a figure it out as I go. But I do realize that truly to engage with people, I need to put myself out there, and that to be above and beyond just stock footage show. And that if that interests you, just subscribe, like, especially follow me on X, Self-Gen Podcast. And otherwise, we'll continue this conversation online or next episode.